The rights of persons of African descent in the diaspora to return to the mother continent is an act of charity or compassion.
Ghana's President John Mahama has announced plans to create a pathway to citizenship for people of African descent around the world, a move he says could help make the long-awaited right of return to Africa a reality.
The rights of persons of African descent in the diaspora to return to the mother continent is not an act of charity or compassion. Repatriation is not an act of kindness. Repatriation is a right of all persons of African descent to return to the mother continent and settle or reside if they wish. And that is why Ghana passed the Right of Abode Act in the year 2000 and is currently considering a new Homeland Return Bill that will codify residence and citizenship pathways for all members of the global African family. This is one of the articles of the manifesto I wish to push when I become the AU chairman, that all African nations must have a right of return for all members of the global African family. The rights of
All right, welcome to This Week in Ghana, your bi-weekly live stream where we talk about all things Ghana news and happenings. Before we get into today's stories, well, first of all, let me do a quick rundown of the stories, and then we'll do introductions. So today we are going to talk more about this particular speech that President Mahama had with the Parliament of Jamaica, where he spoke to the goals and plans between the two countries, and also his broader goals as the AU chairman. There was also some news from Cheddar, who is, if you remember, we spoke about the dispute happening between he and a UK company around the hotel and complex in Osu. And then lastly, the immigration officer transferred from Accra Airport over breakfast money demand, and the special announcement that went out from the government about what was called, I think, extortion at the Ghana airport, and the crackdown on such asks. But before we get into each individual story, we like to do some intros. So I'll turn it over to our co-host for an intro before I introduce myself.
Hello, good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are in the world. My name is Ivy Prosper, and I am a YouTube creator, as well as a documentary producer, published author of the book, Your Essential Guide on Moving to Ghana. I also do work as an MC, as a moderator, and I tell stories from Africa on my YouTube channel. And we have this bi-weekly news where we talk about the latest things happening in Ghana.
All right, and I'm Joe Hatagwa, founder of Authentic African, where we help people visit, move, and invest on the continent of Africa. We have merch, we do consulting as well, and our goal is to connect those in the diaspora with those living on the continent. Now, with that, as mentioned, President John Mahama announced the proposal as part of a renewed effort to address the long-standing call for the right to return to Africa. Two prominent advocates have welcomed the move, having described it as a major step toward making it easier for members of the global African diaspora to establish a permanent connection to Ghana. So Ghana is considering a new Homeland Return Bill that will codify clear legal pathways to permanent residence and citizenship for the global African diaspora. Announced in August 2026 by the president himself during the state visit to Jamaica, the proposed legislation builds upon Ghana's existing 2000 Right of Abode Act to treat repatriation as a fundamental right rather than a privilege. So some of the key goals of the proposal is formal legal pathways to move beyond simple residency permits to establish concrete processes for acquiring Ghana citizenship, acknowledge repatriation as a right, frame the return of the African diaspora not as a quote-unquote charity of compassion, but as an inherent birthright. And then further, he spoke about the vision continentally to serve as a model to encourage other African nations to adopt similar right of return frameworks for members of the global African diaspora and the global African family. So with that, you know, obviously previously it has been done by presidential decree or but by the president himself, right? A president's signature. He himself, the president in between his two terms, and then he again has done this as a presidential decree, but now they're talking about codifying it into law, which is, I think, a welcome change for many who are looking to get citizenship. We've talked about citizenship a ton over the last year and a half or so. And so, Ivy, I'd love to get your thoughts on the proposed bill to codify this into law.
Well, I would like to point out the fact that in this clip that was shared, for those of you who were watching when President Mahama was doing his speech in Jamaica, and he mentioned the Homeland Return Act. The Homeland Return Act was actually introduced by the previous government in 2020. After the year of return ended in 2019, the Homeland Return Act has been a topic of discussion for the last 6 years. So in the previous government, that law, that act was introduced into the Ghanaian parliament, and it was never passed. It didn't pass before the term ended for President Nana Akufo-Addo. And then with the new government coming in, they also are looking at it, and now they're looking to push it through the frameworks, as he was saying in his speech in Jamaica. So it's not something that is brand new being introduced in discussions. It's something that has been discussion since 2020. And then, as he said, in the year 2000 is when Ghana put the law of the right of abode. I've mentioned this many times in previous videos, as well as in my book, Your Essential Guide on Moving to Ghana. I've mentioned it as well, that this law is basically saying that people of African descent have the right to live in Ghana. And it's the very reason why people from the diaspora have been able to come to Ghana. They stay and never leave. And there's many who stay and they never get citizenship, but they've been living here for decades. Like, I've met people who, you know, they moved to Ghana in the 90s or in the early 2000s. They moved from the US or the Caribbean, and they don't have citizenship, but they've been living in Ghana because of the Right of Abode Act that was implemented in the year 2000, that they were able to continuously stay in the country without having some serious challenges. Of course, those who came in the 90s had to keep renewing, you know, documentation and that kind of stuff. And then with the Right of Abode, when you go through the Ministry of Interior and Regional Integration, that's the process that you use to be able to stay under the Right of Abode Act. There is still documentation that you're required to renew every so often. However, it does allow you to stay in the country, not necessarily become a citizen. I do think that if the Homeland Return Act is actually passed, it will actually really be a great blessing for those who are looking to stay in the country long-term or permanently, because it is designed that the citizenship process is supposed to be faster for those of African descent when they come to Ghana. So part of that would be a welcome relief to a lot of people, especially because a lot of the diaspora over the last 6 years who've been getting citizenship, 6-7 years getting citizenship, has been with the president signing off as a executive order, which overrides the way that the legal system handles the immigration for getting citizenship. So with this, they wouldn't have to wait until every time there's an announcement about the diaspora getting citizenship and having to get things together quickly by a certain date, as we see each time when it happens that people are like, oh my gosh, I need to get this together. I need to get that together to get the citizenship. But if this act actually passes, then there's not that stress and that worry, because you can just always be, it can always be a revolving time frame of always people applying for the citizenship. So if it does pass, I think it's a really good thing. I'm sure there's other things that they're adding to the frameworks, you know, from what the previous government did. They probably added certain things or maybe removed some things. So we'll see, because they haven't actually released the details of what's in it, but let's see what happens.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that I found as I used to do research around the continent on these different programs is most programs were done through executive order by presidents. So many times it's done for celebrities, like we've seen it in, you know, Benin and other countries. And then there are also, you know, executive orders for larger groups of people that we're seeing throughout the last couple of years. Sierra Leone, for a time, was the only one offering a citizenship program that is codified into law for people who are of Sierra Leonean descent. They recently made some adjustments to it, but it is on pause today. And so, you know, there's a citizenship by investment program in Sierra Leone, and a few other countries have it as well. Sao Tome and Principe has it. Egypt has one version of a citizenship by investment program. But in terms of a citizenship through heritage, to this degree, I think Ghana would be the largest company and the most populous one as far as the diaspora to introduce a program like this. And so I'd be interested to see if and when it does happen. As someone who has missed my window 3 times, 4 times, I think it is now, to be able to get citizenship in Ghana for all kinds of different reasons, but just me not being in country at the time that it was happening and unable to get there in time. I would love to see this happen beyond executive order, because to Ivy's point, it does happen on the spur of the moment and with maximum 2 weeks notice in most cases. And so it's very difficult. And that's probably by design, which I understand, because you want to ensure that the people who actually are living there are the ones who get it. But there are always people who slip through the cracks, and there are always people on both sides, people who can fly in whenever they want and they can get it done, and those who may actually qualify but have been somewhere else and aren't able to get it in time, which is where I think I would have fallen under. So I would love to see a version of this that is just signed into law. Yeah, so we will follow this closely, and I appreciate the background, knowing that it had been introduced but not passed previously. And one last thing I think I will say is I also understand the apprehension by some. You know, when I talk to some Ghanaians on the ground, I think they worry about people abusing this program. You know, there are reasons why countries have very difficult citizenship processes, right? They want to ensure that they can kind of control migration into their countries. And, you know, it's one of the things that is a contentious topic, especially in the United States and in South Africa. But, you know, there are countries where not everybody is open and welcome to immigration. And so we also have to take into consideration that there are folks on the ground who want to be more cautious about this process and ensure that there aren't just mass migration, as they call it, because there are people who fear, as I mentioned, that, you know, when you have large numbers of people that are offered citizenship, you can have large numbers of people who you probably would not want in country being able to get in. So that's also understandable as well. And the last thing I'll mention too, and I keep saying the last thing, but the right to a vote, I think, is important, because if those of you who've ever studied immigration or learned about immigration in any country, especially for those of us who live in the West, the United States just very seldomly has programs like that, right, for people to come in. And most countries seldomly have programs where any specific group can stay indefinitely and just have to fill out some documentation. Many times they are working to remove such programs, or their temporary programs like temporary protective status or refugee programs. Like, there are very specific ways that this happens, but very small amounts of people can take advantage of it, and in one-off use cases. I think in this, it's basically anyone from the diaspora can go through the proper channels and be able to stay indefinitely without actually becoming a citizen, which I think is rare for any country. But I think that also speaks to Ghana's history, it's always been big on the diaspora and really big on bringing the two groups together, right? It's always been about Pan-Africanism, or at least its inception was on the idea of Pan-Africanism. I'll say that. I won't say it always has been, but at least it's very much the inception for sure. So with that, obviously, John Mahama he spoke about a number of different things. President Mahama, I should say, spoke about a number of different things while in Jamaica, addressing the Parliament of Jamaica. So this was not the only thing he discussed. He also addressed, so it was a special joint sitting of the House of Parliament in Kingston, Jamaica, and it was actually on August 4th, so about 6 days ago. So part of this 4-day visit to Jamaica focused on strengthening bilateral ties, trade, and cultural cooperation. So there were kind of 3 key themes of his address. One was advocating for structural reparatory justice frameworks, or reparations, the right of return, right, as we heard in that clip there. He proposed a formal right of return for the African diaspora, noting he will champion this initiative. And bilateral cooperation. Both nations emphasized expanding South-to-South cooperation, investment, and trade partnerships. And, many times when the diaspora is discussed, I think the Caribbean, unfortunately, does not get brought up enough. I think many times people think about the Americas and the UK, but the Caribbean as well, I think, is a major focus. And so I appreciate that Ghana at every turn, when they talk about the diaspora, they're clear to ensure that they include the Caribbean as well. Anytime they're talking about the 17th region, etc., they're always talking about all Africans, of people of African descent all around the globe, and not just in the West. So I will play a little bit more.
World. Advocacy
Factors that he wants to focus on. And what was also discussed was pushing the AU to do this across the continent of Africa, in terms of beyond the act that we just discussed for Ghana in particular, but for all African countries, for all African people around the world, and pushing that at the AU. What are your thoughts on that particular potential push as he prepares to take on that role?
Regarding reparative justice?
Well, sorry, no, specifically, not beyond the reparative justice, but the specific part about pushing for all African nations to offer a citizenship pathway for people from the diaspora. He did say that in this speech, that he'll be pushing for that as the head of the African Union.
I think that it's a genuinely good idea to encourage the other countries across the continent to also be offering these citizenship programs. However, I think that it's a challenge making that request at a time when there are challenges between the African countries themselves. So, for instance, the whole idea of Africans and visa challenges between African nations themselves that people are already trying to get changed. I know that Ghana recently is one of the countries that's offered the free visas for other Africans coming to Ghana. But I think that we need to work on challenges of xenophobia and different things within the continent. It's an added layer, because if you have challenges of xenophobia in some areas, now when you add the diaspora to the mix, that's another element that could become problematic within Africans. It could become a Africa versus diaspora situation that might happen. We don't know how it can escalate. So I think that there are certain countries that have already been leaning into the idea of welcoming the diaspora. So countries like Ghana, of course, has been leading the way. I've been seeing conversations from countries like Nigeria, conversations coming out of Kenya, of course, Sierra Leone. I've seen these kinds of conversations happening with the Gambia, Gabon, like different countries that are slowly opening up, Benin, Burkina Faso even. Yep. So there's a lot of countries, mostly in the West African areas. And then when it comes to the East, I'm seeing the conversations coming out of Kenya when it comes to diaspora relations. So I think strengthening the countries that already are working on these kinds of programs, I think, is the best start, because once the programs in the countries that are already doing it have a stronghold and a strong handle on things and systems in place, it's easy to do a cookie cutter, copy and paste system into other countries that can also be encouraging to do the same thing as well. And I think that the inclination for Western African countries is quite high because of the DNA references of the transatlantic slave trade, that there's a lot of people who are in the Americas that when they do these DNA tests, their DNA is showing the majority Western African countries versus, you know, the North or the East or the South. Most of their DNA has been showing from the Western part of the continent. So it makes sense for the Western nations to focus on it. But I also do think that President Mahama making the plea to the African Union, I think it is important because the African Union is supposed to be there representing the whole continent and like a sense of unity, right, even though sometimes it seems like they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. And I know they've gotten a lot of criticism over the last number of years, especially when certain things come up.
Yeah, I mean, you made a lot of great points there. And I think the first point that you made about working to make travel between the countries and immigration between the countries is a huge one, right? I think that is a sentiment that a lot of people have. Fix at home first before you start working on other folks, right? So I think that is a really good point because, and I've mentioned this, I think, on this particular live stream over the years, but, you know, I, with my American passport, can land in Tanzania, in Kenya, and do visa on arrival for $25, or I think it was $100 in Tanzania, but it was $25 in Egypt. I think in Kenya, I can't remember what the price is. Don't quote me on it. But you could do it for less than $100 or about $100 with the US passport. With my Sierra Leone passport, I would have to go through a process of going to each of those individual embassies that I got a chance to visit and just drop in with a US passport and sign up for a visa on the ground once I landed. Had I gone with my Sierra Leone passport, I would not have been able to do that. And in fact, when I worked at Jumia on the ground there, we had 3 folks who were not able to go with us for a national sales conference or international sales conference in Egypt because they were denied visa entry because one of them was Nigerian, another one is from Tunisia, 2 were from Tunisia, and 1 was from Nigeria. And for whatever reason, Egypt decided that those 3 could not get visas. The Egyptian embassies in those countries decided that they could not get visas. And this was after one individual traveled to Abuja twice, one to not meet the ambassador who he was supposed to meet with, and then the second time to meet them and only to be turned down for a visa. And so, yes, I think that fix needs to happen ASAP. And I hope that that's part of what Mahama plans to do, President Mahama, I should say, plans to do when in that role at the AU. Because, there's so many different effects that happen because there isn't enough of an understanding of people moving around. You know, when you think about, and I hate to use Europe as an example, but it always comes up because the European Union, and there's an African Union and there's a European Union, and how they operate are completely different. In the European Union, anytime you meet somebody from Spain, they've been to London 10 times throughout their life. They've been to Germany, France, they've been all over Europe, and they also understand each other's cultures so much better. You notice that at this day and age, none of them are fighting each other, right? Because they've been to their countries, they understand them. People from their countries have been to their country, and they all operate kind of in unity. I mean, the European Union has its own currency. I know the UK stepped out with Brexit, but people are regretting that decision and want to get back in, but they still operate as if they're like one. And with the continent of Africa, and we have our own individual groups, right? The what is it? The East African Federation, the EAF. We have ECOWAS, the Economic Community of West African States, and then all of those are under the African Union, and you don't see that same kind of freedom of movement between different groupings, subgroups. And so, I do think that it's really important that is a goal of theirs, because I think that eliminates a lot of the challenges. When you see someone often, you fear them less, and you see more examples of good versions of them, instead of the negative aspects of their culture that gets perpetuated for whatever reason, which leads to, protests and xenophobia and Afrophobia, which I think can be eliminated with a lot more freedom of movement between countries. And so, yeah, and I think if you have more of that, you increase the demand, you decrease the cost of flights, everyone benefits except for the airlines. But in terms of freedom of movement, I mean, the airlines benefit too, because more flights, so they can actually lower their costs, and they can actually have more flights. So in any case, I do think that is absolutely imperative that they work on that. And I think that was a really, really good point. Okay, so with that, we will move on to the next story. And this goes back to a story that we covered some weeks ago. Businessman Cheddar has rejected claims that he owes $14.9 million in debt to a UK-based Cola Holdings Limited, insisting that the legal process surrounding this matter is still ongoing. His response follows reports that the High Court, the Commercial Division in Accra, has enforced a judgment issued by the High Court of England and Wales, ordering him and his company, if I'm not mistaken, to pay more than $14.9 million plus interest and costs to Cola Holdings Limited. And maybe a little bit more context for everyone who is unaware. Cola Holdings says that they took out a loan. They've been paying that loan, and they're saying that Cheddar and his business had not been keeping up their half and their portion of the loan. And so now this court ruling is to state that they are supposed to pay it in full. And it's not just his business, but also he as an individual have been included in this, basically what appears to be like a lawsuit. So we'll play this video, and then we'll have some commentary on the other side.
You own this company with a foreigner, and then you both owe a debt on the company. How then can one person turn this debt to become my personal debt? And after they hold every single document for the business, which is worth ×4 the debt, you have already a collateral. And you need to discuss with me, because I've also paid debt here. Let's talk like business people. But how did it become Nana Kwame Bediako own? It's a company. Companies owe. Ghana, countries, they owe. The Dangotes, they owe. America, they owe. But not to say that I have a debt that I'm running away from. I don't. I have not been handed any money of such. And I have proof.
All right, so that was the only piece that was fully in English. There were other pieces that I think were in Tree. I could not tell, but yes. So Ivy, I know we've talked about this previously. This is the first we're hearing from Cheddar and his own side of the story. Your thoughts on his response and where we are today in this story?
Well, I think that him responding is an example of what it means to work in a business partnership. Now, we don't really know what happens behind the scenes between his company and the company that he's partnered with, that he is referencing. whenever you work in a business partnership and there are debts associated, very likely sort of like a marriage, you know, when a spouse is held liable for some financial responsibility, and if they default, they end up going to the other spouse for the money that's owed. So you have this business partnership, and whatever debts are accrued, it becomes both of their debts. And so he's basically saying, how is it that his business is partnered with another business, but people are only calling the debt his, people are only calling his name when it comes to the debt. So to people know, a lot of the times when people are doing business in Ghana, you want to enter the market and you're not a citizen. The best way for you to enter the market is when you partner with a Ghanaian business owner, business person, and you partner on doing whatever business it is. Now, this is particularly the case when you're doing something that has to be a company based in Ghana. There's people who are able to do business in Ghana without being citizens. When you're doing an export business, you don't have to be a citizen because you're exporting goods out of the country to another country, and you have a business that's registered in another country and you're simply exporting. In those cases, you don't have to be a citizen, but the majority of cases for business, you do. And if you're not, you partner with a Ghanaian. So this could be potentially a case where that foreign company has partnered with his company. Now, he has to also remember that the reason why people are going to say that it's him, people keep mentioning it's him, the same way that when people see that building on 1 Oxford Street, they call it Cheddar's building. Right. They don't mention the company from the UK. They call it Cheddar's building. Same with his other place, Quarles. They call it his building, even though he may be partnered with someone else, because the fact is he is a high-profile public person. He's a personality. He is out there in the public eye. And so people associate him, the face, with the properties that he owns, even if he's owning it with someone else. People don't know who the other people are. They only know him. So, of course, he's the one that ends up being the default when people have discussions and conversations. What he has to remember is people may be talking about him, but the reality is in the court, the court is still going to recognize both entities, not just him. So his plea is really coming out of a public outcry, probably wanting to save his personal reputation, as far as, you know, everything that's been happening, because people associate all of the things that we see the face of as him.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that is kind of, it comes with the territory, right? If you get blamed when it goes wrong and you get all the credit when it looks good, right? This is how it works. And so unfortunately, he is the name, and it is a very popular name, right? It's an unusual one. And the building stands out. I mean, I showed it on screen for a second there. I remember when I first got to Ghana and I saw this building, I'm like, what is this building? This is like, it was the coolest thing I've seen. And I remember I was at Sun City, and it was one of the buildings that stood out to me from the rooftop of Sun City. And I'm like, what building is that?
All the way down, yeah.
And so it was. I was all the way by Labadi Beach, right, where Sun City is, and you could see it, especially at night, right, because of how it lights up. So, you know, look, he's also been a presidential hopeful, right? So that also is another reason why there's going to be a lot of criticisms, and people are going to have opinions, because he has looked to run the country at one point in time, and it looks like there's a potential for that in the future. And so that does come with the territory. So it's to be expected. They did add him as a personal debtor to this, and there are a lot of reasons why that happens in business. You know, generally it's just because if they feel like the business might not be able to pay for it, or if they want to make sure it gets paid, a lot of times they put an individual on it. You know, in the United States, a lot of people do LLCs. They do umbrella companies to ensure that they're not personally liable, right? So, but even a limited organization, I think, is supposed to operate like a lot like the UK Limited or Africa's Limited. It's supposed to operate like an LLC. So I don't know how he personally could become responsible, but probably because he's a public figure, it was easy to just say he should be responsible personally as well, as opposed to his business. So I do understand at least his approach there. I'm interested to see though, when this comes out in court, the investigation into this, because what they're alleging on the UK side is that they've been paying everything and none of what Cheddar side has been paying, right, is what they're alleging. And so I'd like to see if that is the case. He did in this video say he's been paying other debt, right? So he did not say whether or not he's been paying all of this debt. He's saying that businesses have debt. I'm not running away from debt. And he said, I paid for other debt, but he did not say that he's been paying this debt, which is, I think, semantics, right? You have to pay attention to what he's saying. So there is a possibility that he may have some outstanding payments, and that may be why the court actually ruled in favor of this organization, right? They've actually, this was taken to court in the UK, and the Ghana High Court actually continued that case from the UK in Ghana. So interested to see how this goes and how it ends. I do hope it ends well. But yeah, that is a very interesting story, and so we'll keep an eye on it and keep you guys posted as more comes out on that.
We haven't had an engagement, have we? I've not seen our comments.
Yeah, we haven't. Not a ton of people have spoken on this particular this topic. I mean, I think people have been thankful for the deeper context. But yeah, so, and I should say, for those of you who have any thoughts on this story, for those of you who've been following the last few live streams that we've done, please let us know in the comments what you guys are thinking about this particular story or any of the stories we've talked about. We'd like to kind of hear from you and, put your comments on the screen because we really want to hear from you all. That's a good point, Ivy. So the last and final story, I think we lost Ivy for a second, but she will be back in just a moment. The last and final story we have is one that is an incident involving what has been called, some people have been calling it extortion, and I will just say this press release, I have a press release on screen that I will read some of so people get an idea of what we are talking about. And once we read this press release, I will also play a little bit from a video of an example of this. I'm just looking to find the story now. Okay, here we go. So it's very tiny on screen, so I have to pull it from elsewhere. So it says, press release, measures to curb extortion at the airport. So what it says is a high-level stakeholder facilitation meeting was held today. This was on Wednesday, August 5th, 2026, to discuss measures aimed at eliminating the unacceptable practice of extortion begging at all GACL-operated airports. Stakeholders agreed to institute, among other measures, a mystery shopping initiative where, obviously individuals found, so this will be, individuals will be like undercover travelers to be able to watch and see where this happens. But individuals found culpable of extortionary conduct will be publicly identified through appropriate media channels. This name and shame approach is intended to discourage such conduct and reinforce accountability among all personnel operating at the airports. And for those of you who don't know, your name is everything in West Africa, but in Ghana in particular, right? You do not want to shame the family. If you'll hear people say like I've shamed the family name, that is something that is a really, really big deal. You do not want to. So shaming them publicly is an interesting disciplinary measure. Staff found culpable of this practice will face disciplinary measures and will no longer be allowed to work at any airport within its environs. So, and these are all the areas in which this has now been gone into effect. So, the government immigration service all the way to the private security companies. So with that, I do want to play a bit of a story of a young lady who was caught, and the video was released publicly. And you can see how in her particular story, what it can look like. And I will say this is not uncommon, not just in Ghana, but in other West African countries as well. This is kind of a thing. Like in this particular video, she asked for breakfast. In many other countries, they'll ask for Christmas. You know, where's my Christmas? Where's my lunch? I want to buy a cold drink, that kind of thing. So there are different versions of it. And if you travel to any of our airports, you know, I've been to a few. And so I'll play this video. And we will have some commentary on the other side. But before we play the video, I do want to just mention what was said about this particular young lady. So I'll put it up on screen here. Oh, I need to remove this and add this. There we go. And let's see if I can make this larger. I guess this is as big as it gets. So this female immigration officer of the Ghana Immigration Service has been transferred from the Accra International Airport after she was captured in a viral video allegedly demanding money from a passenger for what she described as breakfast. The development was disclosed by the Ghana Airport Company Limited in a statement issued on Thursday, August 6th, amid renewed concerns over alleged extortion involving some individuals at the airport. So we will play this video and we will have some commentary on the other side.
Mami call you the breakfast nigga. Why?
Let me restart that.
Mami call you the breakfast nigga. Why? One 0959. Mami call you the breakfast.
So you barely heard it because you know he was wearing the mic on him, but she did ask for breakfast. Or it was hard to hear. It was a lot of noise in the background, but the name and shame approach has been utilized in this instance. As you can see, this video was released to the public, and this was the day after, sorry, lightning storms. The day after the press release went out. So Ivy, you had mentioned there were some others that were actually relieved of their duties outside of the airport. So I'd love to, bring it to you and your thoughts on this name and shame approach and these challenges that are happening at the airport. Some are calling extortion.
Well, this issue of extortion, asking for money, asking for gifts at the airport in Ghana has been a problematic issue for decades. It's not new. It is something that has happened for a very long time. And I know that with the growth in tourism, it's becoming more of a conversation piece because of social media and the diaspora being more vocal about it. And the thing is, there's many places in the airport where you see signs that say you're not supposed to record. And I'm sure that a lot of people have said that they think that this not recording thing is so that people can continue to get away with some of the extortion that happens. So when I say it's been happening for decades, I'll give an example. When I came to Ghana in 1998, that was a long time ago, 1998. I came and I was a student, and here I am being asked by immigration officers to give them stuff out of my bags, that I should give them something. I've come from abroad and I should just give them something. And I'm just like, what do you mean? This is my stuff and you want me to give you my own stuff? I'm like, I'm a student and you're coming and asking me for my stuff. Sure. So at that time, in the 90s, that was happening. And subsequent times that I've come, it continues to happen. Even, I'm living in Ghana, and if I travel out and come back, sometimes you get those situations of people asking. But I've noticed that, now that I travel on my Ghana passport, when I come back to Ghana, the likelihood of being asked is not as high with me showing my Ghana passport as when I was showing my Canadian passport. So it is something that continues to happen to people because having worked in the tourism sector, and having conversations with travelers, it is one of the complaints that some of them have had. So to your question earlier, there was initially, before this woman's video went viral, there was an announcement, a press release where one of the people in the Ghana airports announced 2 airport employees working in the parking lot who were fired because of apparently asking for money. Because that's another issue, is when you're putting your bags in your vehicle or whatever, you get these people running up to you wanting to take your bag, and then they demand that you give them a tip or give them money. And it's like, sometimes you're like, no, I don't want your help, but then they force themselves on you, and then now they're trying to force you to give them money. So apparently there were 2 people who were in the parking lot who were also fired. But then I also read in another story that there were a couple of people who were fired that were working in. So there's an area, the health area of the airport, where people get the yellow fever shot on arrival, because some people are able to come if they have, they weren't able to get the yellow fever shot before they boarded. They have to have evidence that they're going to get the shot when they arrive in Ghana. So the yellow fever shot, the fee for it, I believe, is $20, and the workers charge them $40. And so obviously that $40 of doubling the charge, they're pocketing some of that money when it only should have been the value of $20. So that's what I read in one of the news reports, is that's another issue of something that's happened too. So the whole concept of name and shame is, like you said earlier, how in culturally, when you are shamed publicly, people talk about you putting shame on the family, putting shame on the people around you, and people tend to respond more to shame. And I think it's a culture that they do that. So for example, I remember the first time I saw a newspaper where they were shaming somebody. So in the newspaper, I saw a picture of a person, and it said, "This person no longer works with us. Do not hire them. They have stolen from our company." And their picture is there, their name is there, and it's saying what they've done, and don't hire them. And so that was like, whoa, I can't believe this is in the newspaper like this. So it's something that people do. They'll say, don't do this with this person, don't do business with that person, and they'll put their picture out there and shame you. So I think that they're taking this approach probably because it is a scare tactic that will make people be like, oh my gosh, they're doing a mystery shop style where it's a mystery person pretending to be a passenger and they don't know who it could possibly be. So it could put fear into people of losing their jobs. And maybe it might change the behaviors. We never know. Because one of the things too I notice is the comment section on some of the posts related to this story. There's a lot of Ghanaians who've been saying, what's the big deal about her asking for breakfast money? Maybe she's hungry. Why are you making a big deal? Why are you embarrassing this woman? There's nothing wrong with asking for some breakfast. I've seen a lot of those kinds of comments, that there's people who are like, what's the big deal? They're not seeing the deeper issue. They're saying, what's the big deal? So that alone shows you the thought process across the board, that a lot of people don't see it as an issue. But of course, all the travelers, this is your first port of call arriving in the country. And if your first port of call arriving in a country is somebody asking you to give them something, you're like, whoa, I just got here, and this is what you're asking for. So, yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, you made a lot of great points. And, I think 2 things I would say is, one, obviously tourism is something that Ghana is looking to grow. And, that never bodes well for your country when people are asking, are asking for money when you arrive somewhere in the country. It's just not a good look. And, it is something that unfortunately persists. We have this phrase where, in Sierra Leone, you babode, like, I'm here, your boy is here, meaning like, which is basically just means like, can I have some money just for being here? I'm just around. You have this thing where culturally, if somebody helps you get out of a parking spot, even though you don't need their help, they're hoping for a tip, right? To your point about everything is a tipping service, right? Everything is a tipping service. You ask somebody, where is this? And they're like, oh, let me come take you. Come with me. Let me take you. then of course there's an expected tip after they take you to the place. They could have just pointed, but instead if they walked with you, now it's a tipping service. So yeah, I mean, I think it is important to curb that for those reasons. But I think there are other systemic reasons and systemic issues that I do think need to be addressed, which would help curb that as well. So, you know, the question earlier, does this approach seem to minimize these cases? I think you mentioned it. I mean, of course, people don't want to bring family shame. So we definitely think it will. We'll see, because this is a new tactic. But, you know, we also have to talk about the minimum wage. Now, I have two approaches and views to this, right?
I was about to mention that.
Okay. So, the minimum wage and the average wage. Now, I will say, in the airport, they make more than the average wage, and they got a uniform, and they work in AC all day. So I don't necessarily have any sympathy for the airport worker, okay, inside, because Ghana is hot. So if I'm outside on the street all day and I'm a food vendor and I'm cooking food, and I can understand that person being like, please, you know, I get it. But you're working in AC all day. You don't have to buy clothes for work. They give you a uniform. Like I said, it's AC and it's cool in that airport, very cold. So you get to enjoy the AC. You have people nearby. They're always talking and laughing and chatting, right? So to me, I don't have much sympathy for them. And this is coming from someone who worked, and you know, you did too, who worked in Ghana, got paid in Ghana cedis. So this is not like my Western American mentality. Okay, I worked for Ghanaian cedis and in the country. So I don't have any sympathy for the airport worker, but I do understand the culture, because a lot of government workers in many countries don't get paid, and or get paid a substandard wage, right? The minimum wage comes out to something like $70 to $80 or $90 a month. And there's inflation continues to happen, or it's been steadied, but it doesn't go really back down. It's just been curved in most cases, and they've tried to bring it down as much as possible in the recent months. But you know, what you used to pay in CDs before to buy the same thing it's you know, sometimes double the price it was just a year ago. But yeah, you had some thoughts on the minimum wage and how people get their income in country.
Yeah, just you know, I mean, you did mention that the airport workers, you know, they're definitely making more than what some of the average salaries are in Ghana. At the same time, you know, I've had this discussion where I spoke on a panel, and I you know, a couple of weeks ago, and I said that the one thing that I think could make a change in the country is increasing minimum wage, because minimum wage in Ghana is 21 Ghana cedis and 77 pesos per day. So legally, a company doesn't have to pay you more than that per day, you know, which equates to, you know, barely 600 Ghana cedis a month. When you calculate it, if you worked, I don't know, if you worked 20 days or something.
That's like $50, $51.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's like for the whole month, that's the minimum, you know, but government workers, there's a lot of government workers that are making, you know, significantly more than the average salary, but I mean, than the minimum wage. But even with that being said, I still feel like some of the salaries people are making, even though it's a little bit more, are still not enough, in my opinion, are still not enough of a livable wage. You know, I feel like if wages were increased, some of the behavior might be curbed. But I also think that even when people are paid more, sometimes that mindset is so deeply ingrained in the fabric of society that it doesn't matter what the increase is, people still do some of these things. Because when you think about it, there's people who are making a lot, but they're still doing things like trying to cheat the system, or trying to cut corners, trying to, you know, get one over someone, even if they're making a lot. So I feel like it's still a mindset shift that that needs to be adjusted and to change. But I mean, like I said earlier, since the 90s, I've experienced this hustle at the airport. So how long is it going to take to kind of get that out of the mindset, because there's even people who, even when I think about police officers, even I've heard people, and these are words of other people. These are not my words, but I have overheard people, because when I first moved to Ghana, I used to take the trotro a lot, and I would listen to conversations because I can understand Chi. So I would listen to conversations. And I remember hearing people saying they wanted to become a police officer so that they can get extra money from hustling people at on the road, that kind of stuff. So yeah, I think that the mindset shift is what needs to change.
Absolutely. And I do think, there's a long history, and, we don't need to, go through the entire history, but because what I'm about to say is maybe not specific to this particular government or any particular government, to be clear. But what you hear a lot of people say is, well, the government does it, so why can't I? The president does it. This minister does it. Why can't I? Leadership does start at the top. And so if it's culturally a part of the process from levels of leadership, why wouldn't you see that trickle down to the everyday person? And because it's happened over decades, multiple decades, why would we expect that the individuals would not do it and stop doing it? And that applies to all forms of what I call commission. Everybody wants their commission. And so they're always going to overcharge a little bit. The price is this much, but we're going to overcharge a little bit if you don't know the price, And I think it's a tactic, right? That's why there aren't generally prices listed on things. Like many times you walk into a shop and there's no price listed in there on any of the things in there. So probably depending on your accent, you may get a different price, right? And this is also happens to Ghanaians. I had a friend who would dress up in the dress down, I would say, cover her hair, not wear makeup, just do the whole dress down when she would go to the market, because she said that anytime she did that, she would always have a chance negotiating than when she would go after work, for example, because they saw her as a big woman with a nice car. And so they would, increase the prices for her when she would do that. And this is someone who's Ghanaian, who speaks Tree, who understands to navigate the culture. And it still was a challenge for her. So imagine you as a foreigner with an accent. Of course, that is part of the process. But yeah, I mean, look, it's difficult to change that culture. And I think it does require some form of an overall. And I think if you start with this on the government level and you actually see it, and the people in the highest positions of power actually hold each other accountable and don't continue to, funds don't go missing. The next administration doesn't arrest people from the previous administration, because that's also a thing, right? You always find that there was somebody who was in a corruption trial who was in the previous administration when there's a new party that's in power now, and it just continues. There's a cycle that keeps happening, and it's not specific to Ghana. It happens in a lot of places, but I've seen it happen. When I first got to Ghana, I saw some trials happening on the previous administration for corruption, and I remember thinking to myself, I've seen this in other places too. It's a very common practice. So Ghana's has the same issue here too. So yeah, I think that's also another challenge too, is that it's very hard to remove this from other areas of society when those who are in positions of power don't. All right, so I hope that we brought additional perspective to these stories. I'm sure you guys have seen some of them in your feed, in your news feed, if you're following different pages online. But we always want to make sure that we bring them to you if you haven't, and also bring maybe a different perspective that you may not have had. There are a couple people just saying some things here, so people are starting to engage now, so this is good. I don't know, I'm not gonna read everything everyone's saying, but I will just put it up on screen so you can read it. Okay, this one's different. It's not just a Ghanaian thing. My Ethiopian friend says Ethiopians, okay, biggest bargainers. Okay, it's a continental thing. Ghana is just getting the foreigners who are complaining about it. Well, there's a difference between bargaining and upcharging, right? So the person who's making the purchase is bargaining. The person who is making the sale can be upcharging, and that's a different thing, right? So I think a lot of people do a bargain process, right? And so I can understand, starting a little higher if somebody's going to try to talk you down on a price. I get that. But we all know the accent thing. I had a housekeeper when I was in Ghana. I did not go with her to go grocery shopping. When she would go to Makola Market and the different markets she was going to, I was nowhere to be found. Because as soon as I was around, I knew. In fact, she told me, just tell me what you want. Don't because I was like, I want to go film the process. I want to see what it looks like. She's like, no. It's like, unless you want to pay double, yeah, you can come. So it's like, but like, just don't. She told me from the beginning, don't. Like, let me do this. And she was right. She always got the best prices. Because I did go to Makola Market once and I didn't get the prices she got. So no matter how much I negotiated, it was not happening. So I do think that is an important aspect to understand. Okay, with that, do you have any final thoughts on any of the stories, Ivy, before we go?
I do not. We've talked about a lot this evening, and I hope that everybody's taken it in. And just another reminder that it's always important to keep track of what's happening in Ghana, if it is a country you're interested in, or if it's a country you're thinking about moving to, visiting, investing in, whatever it may be. That's why we like to do this bi-weekly news stream, so that we can talk to you about what's happening on the ground in Ghana. And it gives you a better understanding of the lay of the land, especially if you're planning to live or do business. So you can always follow me, follow my page, Ivy Prosper, everywhere on YouTube, Instagram, Threads, Facebook. It's Ivy Prosper. You can also reach me by email, info@ivyprosper.com, or you can book consultations with me. Send me an email if you're looking to book a consultation, and I'll send you the link to do that. And my book is available on Amazon, Your Essential Guide on Moving to Ghana.
All right. And you can find me everywhere at Authentic African. Similar to what Ivy just mentioned, I do some consulting, as well as I can point you in the right direction depending on the country you're looking for and the services you're looking for. I have vetted people that I point people to help you with those things. So in Kenya, Ghana, if you're looking for real estate agents, Kenya, if you're looking to relocate, Nigeria as well, because that is a place that is difficult to navigate. So if you're looking to potentially relocate or invest there, I have some contacts for you there. And the same with South Africa as well. So, and of course, Sierra Leone, if you so choose, I'm here to help with that as well. So I will also say that one thing that I will mention is that if you're thinking about it and you haven't visited, do it sooner than later, because you don't want to be last to the party. If you're thinking about moving, if you're thinking about visiting, you should start getting to Ghana sooner than later. The Ghana Tourism Authority was at InvestFest this year. 31,000 people were there, and they were trying to stop everybody to get them to come to Ghana. So, this is the ground floor opportunity, as we always say. So if you're thinking about visiting, moving, and investing in any way, start the process now, because you don't want to be late to the party. Technically, you're already getting late to the party. So you want to start it as soon as possible. And with that, thanks for watching. We will see you guys all on the next one.
Bye for now.
Bye, guys.